Let me set the scene. White LED lights ominously reflecting off the white walls and floor. A cold breeze cooling off a scorching feeling of anticipation. Weak legs crumbling under the all-consuming weight of the lead apron. A Billy Joel song barely escaping the ancient plug-in speaker on the wall. And blood. Lots and lots of blood. That morning, I was witnessing surgery from the operating room, getting to see what life would be like as a doctor, my dream job, making the world a better place. The only issue was that I hated it. With the first swipe of a scalpel, I immediately knew that job wasn't for me. My dream was crushed. So I embarked on a mission to try to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I started by reaching out to friends of my parents of my friends, just to talk with them about what they did with their life, what industry they were in, and their careers. And really early on, I found that these conversations were incredibly valuable. I was taking so much away. I had pages and pages of notes from just a 10-minute conversation. At the same time, I was talking with my friends, talking to them about what they wanted to do with their lives, in their careers, and their aspirations. And I realized I wasn't alone in not knowing what I wanted to do when I grew up. A lot of kids feel the same way I did. So then I had a realization. I, myself, could have these conversations with experts, and I could share the insights with people like me who needed it. So in December 2022, I created the Profiles podcast to share these insights with the world. I arrived at my first podcast interview having absolutely zero experience interviewing. I figured, how hard could it be? I would just have a conversation, it was just back and forth. I would follow my curiosity. And I had a list of 20 or so questions to ask just in case things went south. And they did, really early on. Within 20 seconds of this conversation, I found myself reading off the script. I was like a robot. It was robotic. It was isolated. I left absolutely zero room for my curiosity to wander. I had to go back and edit that conversation after. And I was just immediately appalled with how gut-wrenchingly awful I sounded. What was supposed to be a conversation turned into an interrogation. And it was at that moment I knew I needed to learn how to ask questions. So I did some research. And through my initial research, I found a pretty self-evident truth. As kids, we ask a lot of questions, 200 to 300 a day. But as we get older, as we go through school, we ask fewer and fewer. Now, why is that? Well, the school system incentivizes answers, not questions. It teaches us the ends, but not the means. Imagine, though, for a second, if instead of teaching towards answers, schools were to teach students how to effectively ask the right questions so that individually students could arrive at the answers. Imagine how much richer student learning would be. But good questioning is a skill that transcends the boundaries of school. It's a meta skill, applicable throughout our entire life, in any industry we find ourselves in. But really, why should we ask good questions? Well, here are 4 compelling reasons. Number 1, in conversations, good questions enable us to connect with other people. They go below the surface. And instead of surface-level questions like, how are you doing? Or my personal favorite, how about this weather? We can actually go below the surface and create a meaningful connection that is more enjoyable and less artificial. Number 2, good questions in school and in learning help us learn more, learn deeper, and actually increase the rate of learning because we're focusing on the right things. Now, number 3, with technology, good questions enable us to use technology effectively. With AI and chatbots like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, these AI models, the quality of the output that we get is solely determined by the prompt we ask. So if we want to get good answers and use these machines effectively, we have to ask the right questions. Lastly, we live in an information age where information and data are as abundant as ever. And if we ask the right questions, we're able to weed out the noise and find what's actually important. Good questions are the answer. So we know why we need to ask good questions, but how can we actually go about doing so? Well, here are 4 strategies for asking better questions that I've learned through research, refinement, and asking thousands of them. Now, the first strategy is simple to say, but hard to actually do, and that's just to ask. Really, just ask. We have to build up the skill of asking questions before we can actually ask good questions. It's a skill like any other skill. The other thing with asking is that we need to ask the right sources. As an introvert, it was really hard for me to get distinguished professionals to join me, a sophomore in high school, on a podcast for an hour when I had no credibility. I thought I would be thrilled with a 20% hit rate, but I was surprised to find that that number was way higher. And that led me to discover a pretty fundamental truth about humans, okay? People love to talk about themselves, not in an egotistical way, but it's just part of our human wiring to want to share the lens through which we see the world. Everyone from CEO to astrophysicist to astronaut to teacher to executive to student you haven't met yet is so much more willing to talk with you. All we have to do is ask. Okay, now we're asking questions, but how do we actually ask good questions? That leads us to the second strategy, curiosity. Let me tell you a story. In the late 19th century, a young thinker began grappling with some of the most profound questions of his time. And although he had no formal academic position, his mind was constantly swirling with questions, hypotheses, ideas, and questions. One evening, while on a stroll through the picturesque streets of Italy, this young thinker saw a motorcycle zoom past him, engine roaring, tires kicking up dust. And he thought to himself, what would it be like to ride a motorcycle alongside a beam of light? That simple question led to another, and another, and another. Would the world look different? Would time itself change? And another, and another, and another, until eventually, his restless curiosity and his genius ability to ask good questions led him to form the core of modern physics, the theory of special relativity. That man was none other than Albert Einstein. Now, was Einstein a genius? Yes, of course. But he never regarded himself as one. I have no special talent, Einstein once said, other than that I am passionately curious. This is Albert Einstein we're talking about. I have no special talent, other than that I am passionately curious. If Einstein regarded his curiosity as his chief asset, shouldn't you and I work to use it more in our life? If we approach things with curiosity and a desire to learn, we are going to ask better questions because we want better answers. Now, the third strategy piggybacks on this idea of curiosity, and it's active listening. Let me explain. In conversations, we often find ourselves following the path of least cognitive resistance. In other words, we're nodding our heads, we're acting like we're listening, we maybe give some verbal confirmation like or interesting, when in reality, our brain is in a completely different thought loop. We're either thinking about what we're wearing, what the other person is wearing, what we had for breakfast, or the question we're going to ask next. But believe it or not, even thinking about the next question you're going to ask is not active listening. Active listening occurs when we listen to understand rather than listen to respond. Listen to understand rather than listen to respond. When we listen actively, a beautiful thing happens because we're actually listening to what the other person is saying. We're going to find things that pique our interest. We're going to be more curious. And when we're more curious, we're going to ask better questions, which is going to lead to better answers and a more interesting conversation, which is going to lead us to listen more. This whole cycle, though, it starts with active curiosity. Okay, now the last strategy I've learned is by far the most important one. In conversations, we often find ourselves asking easy questions. These questions don't require us to put ourselves out there very much. They typically manifest themselves as what questions, and they dive into specifics. What do you do for a living? What did you have for breakfast? What year did the Soviet Union collapse? What did Neil Armstrong say when he walked on the moon? Now, these questions give us answers, but they don't help us understand the information and the answers in a story or a systematic way. A step above what questions are how questions. How questions dive into processes, applications, and concepts. How did you get into that career path? How did the Soviet Union collapse? How can we reduce speeding in the Austin area? These questions give us more than answers. They help us understand how the answers are related to each other. But the best questions come down to using the most powerful three-letter word in the English language. Why? Why questions dive into motivations, intentions. They foster critical thinking. They enable us to see the lens through which other people see the world. Why did you choose that career path? Why do you think that way? Why do you feel that way? Why is this an issue that we need to solve? And why questions don't literally have to be WHY, but thinking critically about the questions we ask ourselves and the questions we ask others is incredibly important. When we ask deep questions, when we ask why questions, we can connect with others in a better way, and we can go below the surface. One of the most incredible things I've learned through this whole podcast journey is that the quickest way to get a complete stranger on the internet who you've never met before to open up is to just ask them why. Just ask them why. And we'll be amazed at the insights we're going to take away and how vulnerable they will be by just asking why. So now let's zoom back out to questions. I'm going to say this again. Questions are a meta skill, applicable in any area we find ourselves at any point in our lives, whether it be conversing with others, connecting with others, whether it be in school, in the classroom, outside of the classroom, whether it be using technology effectively. The world is increasing its rate of growth faster and faster each year. So if we want to stay up to date, we have to ask the right questions. Good questions are the answer. So this week, I challenge us all, every one of us, to find one person, maybe two, maybe three, and go up to them and just ask. Just ask them a question. Practice your skill of asking. Number two, arrive with curiosity and know that everyone has something to teach you if you're humble enough to learn. Number three, listen actively to what they're saying. This one is hard, but listen actively to what they're saying. And lastly, and most importantly, ask them why. And if we do these four things, we're going to be amazed at how rich our lives can become. Because really, in the end, what do we have to lose? No. How hard could it be? Not that either. Why not? Thank you.